Another new day, another new lecture, and another few marks for you at CA Enter and CA Final Exam both. We're looking at GST and we're looking at exemption today. I'll give you a nice shortcut on how to remember an exemption, just like we have a shortcut for every exemption that is there in your exam. This one is, guys, on passenger transport services. So have you written wanderlust in your Instagram bio? Are you a wanderlust? Do you like traveling? Do you like traveling by air, by train, by bus, by Ubers, etc.? Then this one is something that you should understand. Also, guys, from an exam perspective, there could be a really nice question. We'll tackle one such question at the end after we understand an exemption on passenger transport service. Before we head to the exemption, guys, please remember, on anything that is there is GST. If you take a train ticket and there is GST, it will unnecessarily add to the cost of your travel. And passenger transport basically impacts the entire country because everyone needs to be mobile, everyone needs to travel from one place to the other. So the government honestly doesn't want to tax every passenger transport. So let's see what they want to tax and what they exempt in this next SMAT quickie. SMAT quickies are small trailers of what lies in our lectures, guys. Online and both offline, we have a lot of shortcuts and we have nice stories to help you understand, revise, re-revise, and make sure that you ace your CA exams. Over to one such SMAT quickie. All right, so we're looking at an exemption of passenger transport services. So imagine you traveling the entire country and let's see how you're exempted or how you're taxed. First up, we'll take one mode of transport. My favorite mode of transport, because it's the fastest mode of transport, is air travel. Guys, the government says that if you can afford air travel, because air travel is expensive, so if you can afford air travel, you shall also be taxed on this. So there is tax on this air travel, but there are exceptions. If you're going to the Northeast, if you're taking a flight to any of the Northeastern states, or if you're coming from a Northeastern state, going to or coming back from a Northeastern states, and guys, Northeastern states are Assam, Manipur, Meghalaya, Mizoram, Nagaland, Tripura, all those states plus one. Why I say plus one? Because there's an airport called Bagdogra in West Bengal. And this airport, although is not in one of the northeastern states, it's in West Bengal, but still, if you take a flight to Bagdogra, then on your flight cost, there will be no GST because this is an exception. So flying to Northeast, coming back from Northeast will not have any GST. Guys, everywhere else, you take a flight from Bangalore to Delhi, you will have to pay the airfare plus GST. Next, a lot of small airports have been created under a scheme called Regional Connectivity Scheme. Guys, what is the scheme? The government wants to connect small cities also through air, so they have a scheme called Regional Connectivity Scheme. And under that scheme, so that you are encouraged to take a flight to these small cities, example, let's say Shirdi, or example, let's say Tirupati. So if they have a small airport there and you're encouraged to travel through air there, they want to make it easier, and hence they say for regional connectivity scheme airports, for 3 years after the date of commencement, 3 years up to the date of commencement. So let's say it commences today. So from today, for 3 years on the tickets to that airport or coming back from that airport, there will be no GST. Otherwise, guys, air travel is taxable. Why? Because if you can afford air travel, then you can afford to pay GST as well. Next, my second best mode of transport is rail, guys. I love train travels because a lot of childhood memories are associated with rail travel. Let's understand how is rail travel taxed or exempted. They say that is the rail is AC. That means if your ticket has reads AC, in the exam question reads AC, then it will be taxable. So if you're traveling by AC, that means you can afford to pay for AC, you can also afford to pay GST. Also, if it's first class, whether AC is there or not there, if your train ticket or if the exam question reads first class, then you have to pay tax, because if you can afford AC or if you can afford first class, not and, guys, or. So even if it's AC, it's any other class, still it will be taxable. And if it's first class, even if it's non-AC, it will be taxable. Simplifying it, if you can travel by AC or you can travel by first class, then in both cases, you should be ideally paying GST because you can afford it. But guys, other than that, they don't charge GST. So non-AC travel, other than first class travel, they don't want to charge GST. Also, some things they want to encourage you, like metro, like monorail, like tramway, they want to encourage you. So they are all exempt. These are all exempt. I hope you understood it. So rail, again, if you're going by the premium classes like first class, or if you're going in an AC train, then you will have to pay GST. Next, guys, is taxi and rickshaw. Taxis and rickshaws, guys, are generally exempt. They're exempt. But if you're rich and if you open your phone and you go to Ola, Uber, or any of those apps and you book a taxi, that's called a radio taxi, guys. That's an exception. So if you're booking a radio taxi or a radio rickshaw, then in that case it will be taxable, because if you can afford a radio taxi, then you can also afford to pay GST. So the moment you raise your hand and you stop a taxi and you go into that, it's called meter taxi, metered rickshaws. They are not subject to GST. But the moment you remove your phone and you book it through one of these apps, then they're called radio taxi. And if you can afford radio taxi, then you can afford to pay GST as well. I'll revise everything for you, but right now keep in mind, guys, whenever things get premium, they want to check GST. Example, airfare, they want to take GST. AC train or first class train, they want to take GST. And radio taxi cab, they want to take GST. Next, guys, is waterways. Honestly, in India, we don't use a lot of waterways, but the government wants to encourage us to use waterways. So they say, in case of inland waterways, they are exempt. So inland waterways are generally exempt, but there is an exception to that. So let's say you're going from Chennai to Andaman Nicobar Islands, which is a part of India only, within India traveling. But if it's for tourism purposes, how do you identify tourism? You don't go to ask every passenger whether it's for tourism. If you ask mainly what is the purpose of that transport, if it's mainly tourism, example, a cruise which goes from Bombay to Goa, if it's a cruise line, and if it's mainly tourism, then it will be taxable. If you can afford to go for a holiday, then you can afford to pay GST. Of course, guys, anything that is going outside India will always be subject to GST. So if there's a cruise line which is going from Bombay to Singapore, on that there will definitely be GST. So in waterways, they want to encourage waterways, and hence inland waterways is not taxable. Exception is if there's an inland waterway, but mainly for tourism purposes, then it will be taxable. And now, guys, the next ones, let's see the next ones. What generally happens when you go on a trip? Let's say I go for a business trip to Delhi, and in Delhi, I'll need a car to myself, right? So I'll book something which is called a contract carriage. Guys, there's a shortcut. I'll tell you all the shortcuts at the end, but right now, a contract carriage with two C's. Contract carriage. So guys, contract carriage has two conditions, and that's why there are two C's, two conditions, C and C. What are the two conditions? If the contract carriage is AC, that means the car that you book for the whole day, not the Uber that you book, guys, that is anyway subject to GST, but contract carriages are those that you book throughout, that's for you only. So let's say I book a car for the entire day, that's a contract carriage. And if that contract carriage is AC, or if that contract carriage is for tourism purposes, any of those two conditions, how do you remember it? Contract carriage is two C's, two conditions. If it's AC, then it will be taxable. If it's for tourism, it will be taxable. Don't worry, we'll do a question in the end which will help you also test your knowledge on these concepts. And last, guys, one of the best ways to travel to short distances is through buses. Those are called stage carriages. Why are they called stage carriages? Because they're already staged. You don't book them. The bus is anyways going. You're just sitting in the bus, taking a ticket and going ahead. Guys, only one C, that means only one condition. That's the shortcut. Only one C, that means only one condition. And the condition here is that if it's AC, then it will be taxable. If it's AC, it will be taxable. Guys, this is what it is on passenger transport services. Let's quickly revise and I'll give you the shortcuts as well. Guys, shortcut is if it's premium, then it will be taxable. Example, airfares. If you're rich enough to afford airfare, then you're rich enough to pay GST. Except northeastern states, including Bagdogra, guys, going there as well as coming back, and also regional connectivity scheme, because the government wants to encourage this regional connectivity scheme for 3 years. Airfare done. Next is rail. Rail, they don't want to tax. Metro, monorail, tram, nothing they want to tax. But if you can afford AC rail, then they will tax you. Metro, mono, tram, always exempt, guys. But otherwise, in rail, let's say you're going from Bombay to Delhi and you take a Rajdhani, which is AC, then in that case, it will be taxable. Or if you're going in first class, which is even non-AC, but it's first class. So if you spot any of these words in the exam, it will be taxable. Taxi and rickshaws, if you stop them by a hand, example, meter taxis, meter rickshaws, no problem. But if you're rich enough to book an Uber, remove a phone and book an Uber, then you're rich enough to pay GST as well. Next, guys, waterways. The government wants to encourage waterways. So inland waterways is tax-free, exempt, but exception is there. If it's for tourism purposes, then it will be taxable. Of course, going out of India on a cruise liner definitely is taxable. Contract carriage has two conditions, AC as well as tourism. Any of those conditions, if they are met, they will be taxable. So if you go to Delhi and for tourism purpose, if you book a car, then that will be contract carriage, but it's for tourism, so hence taxable. And then last is stage carriage, something which is already staged and it's already going. You just take a ticket and sit in it. In that, there's only one condition because only one C. If you understood this, let's test our knowledge with an example which can come in the exam, something on these lines. Mr. D boarded a Rajdhani Express fully AC train from Kanpur on 9th October 2020. Let's read the last line first. Examine the leviability of GST on the various modes of travel. So as and when we read, guys, we'll solve the question immediately then as and when we read. So we'll just underline the main modes of transport and we'll decide whether it's taxable or not, whether GST is leviable or not. Guys, Rajdhani Express is train and it's a fully AC train. So on that there will be GST, because if you can afford AC, you can afford GST. From Kanpur on 9th October to 2020 and disembarked at New Delhi. So now you're at New Delhi. You hired a car from a local cab operator for the whole day. Whole day basically means it's your own, so it's a contract carriage. So two conditions: on a lump sum consideration, and visited Delhi's historical monuments, guys, for tourism purposes. So even this one will be subject to GST. In the night, he took the metro. Guys, metro is exempt because the government wants to encourage people to take metro. Don't confuse it. Even though it's AC, etc., you don't have to think about it. Metro, monorail, tram, the government wants to encourage you to use it, and hence that is also not subject to GST. Next, guys, to the international airport, you took the metro, no problem with that. And then you boarded a flight to Mumbai. Guys, not Northeastern, not even regional connectivity scheme. So this will also be taxable. At Mumbai airport, you used a radio taxi, you opened your phone and you booked an Uber. This is also going to be taxable going to your hotel. So guys, here everything is taxable except the metro, which is exempt. Guys, passenger transport, if you remember the premium aspect and the taxable aspect, the AC aspect and the taxable aspect, and the contract carriage, two C's, that means two conditions, and stage carriage, one C, that is one condition. There are very rare chances that you will go wrong on this. If a question comes on passenger transport services, I'm sure you're going to remember the SMAT quickie and you're going to ace that and get all the marks you can. Thank you. Over to the next one really soon.